Playing something like this with the metronome probably looks really intimidating, but in this video I'm going to show you a simple trick that makes it so much easier. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at quickstartclarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. So first of all, let's talk about why playing something like this is really quite difficult with the metronome. First of all, this comes from the Rose 32 Etudes, and this is number 3. And let's say you were going to play this at maybe quarter note equals 54 for the tempo, which is a pretty reasonable performance tempo of this. And let's look at this specific section here. So when we look at this little bit, there's a few things that are going to make this challenging. First of all, if we just put our metronome onto 54 and tried playing it, we would run into some issues of trying to line up, and we'd probably get something like this. Ba ba da 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 ba da, and you'd be all over the place. That's what a lot of my students sound like when they first do this exercise, and absolutely what I first sounded like when I was working on this etude the first time. But the reason why, there's a couple reasons that make this really challenging. One is the speed of the tempo in general. So if I turn on that metronome again, it takes a little while to settle into really being able to predict it, and it can be challenging to predict the next beat. Go ahead and try that and see if you can anticipate when that next click is going to be. You were probably able to settle into it and get the hang of it, but I bet at first it was a little bit off and you were probably wanting to be a little bit early and it was coming a little later than you expected, or maybe sooner than you expected. But either way, the predictability of the steady beat is a little challenging because there's so much space between each beat. As a general rule, if the tempo and the metronome clicking is going slower than 60 beats per minute, I find it quite challenging to predict when that next beat is. And I think it's just something to do with our brain has a hard time predicting longer than a second very accurately. And when it comes to playing with the metronome, if you can't predict when that next click is going to come, then you'll have no chance at actually getting the rhythm to line up with that click. Now, the other thing that makes this rhythm particularly challenging to figure out is actually the rhythm itself. We have an eighth note tied to a 30-second note, and then 3 30-second notes, and then we land at the next beat and the next eighth note. So when we have kind of those goalposts of each beat that we're aiming for, so we're aiming for there, we're aiming for there, we're aiming for there, and so on and so forth, it becomes really quite difficult to figure out how does all of this stuff fit within all of that craziness. So we have to get that beat and that beat to line up with the metronome, but we also have to do all of that stuff precisely in between. And that becomes really difficult to kind of conceptualize because we have to figure out, okay, this first note, the eighth note tied to the 30-second note, is half the beat plus a little bit, and then 30-second notes are fast. And that's why when we do this with the metronome, what often happens is we get that kind of dee ba da ba, dee ba da ba, dee, and end up waiting and rushing. Or the other thing happens where we hold the first note too long, we get dee ba da ba, and we end up too late and the metronome passes us by while we're still holding that first note sometimes. So there's two challenges here. One is the predictability of the beat because the beat is going so slow and is kind of slower than 60 beats per minute. And number two is the actual subdivisions, the subdivisions being very fast and trying to comprehend how they actually organize and fit into the beat. Now, the very simple solution that solves both of those problems is to simply take the metronome and instead of playing it at 54, turn it up to double that tempo. Or if you're very proficient with the metronome, you could also turn on the eighth note subdivision, but just doubling the tempo works totally fine. Now we've solved the predictability of it because we're going significantly faster than 60 and we can really predict. It's easy to know when that next beat is going to happen. So that's problem solved. And then when we look at the music, now instead of only having these quarter note anchors to aim for, we have eighth note anchors as well. Here and here and here, and again, so on and so forth. And by having those extra eighth notes to aim for, now instead of a eighth note tied to a 32nd note, three 32nd notes that we have to fit into this really abstract amount of space, we hold the first eighth note for one click, we anticipate where that next click's going to happen. After that click happens, we lead three 16th notes or three 32nd notes, but they'll feel like 16th notes with this subdivision leading to the next beat. So now it just becomes click, click leading to here, click leading to here, click leading to here, click leading to here, and then the 16th notes are just exactly the same as the eighth notes. 1 E and a 1. And it's not so hard and not so bad anymore. Maybe with that many markings on it's a little confusing, but let me go ahead and demonstrate it actually with the metronome sort of singing through it, and I'll sort of count through it as well. So let me zoom back in. Let me get the metronome going at 108. And you'll see what I mean. So we're starting here on beat 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, E and a 1, E and a 2, E and a 3, E and a 4, E and a 1. And now it's not so bad. It's actually much, much more manageable to see those rhythms broken down like that. The other huge benefit of doing the subdivisions like this is it makes it so much easier to do good slow practice on it as well. Maybe you aren't able to confidently get the notes that fast on something like this right away. Totally fine. You can slow it down. Whereas before, if we were doing it with quarter notes at 54, slowing it down would only make it harder and make it even less predictable when the next click is. Now at 108, we can slow it down considerably. I'll go down to 80 here, and we can slow practice it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, E and a 1, E and a 2, E and a 3, E and a 4, E and a 1. So hopefully that's making sense, and you can see how you can take a very complicated passage like this and break it down and make it so much more manageable. Let's try one more section starting on the next line. So if we look at this bit here, we have kind of the same problem where if we're just doing it with quarter notes, we have a quarter note there, 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 there. And with this, especially when we look at this beat here, beat 3 of that second measure, gets really tricky because we have a 30-second rest and then 7 30-second notes before the next beat. And again, we have that very unpredictable 54. But if we take this and do it with the metronome, it becomes so much more manageable when we have it in eighth notes. So I'll do it in 80. And actually, before I do that, let me draw in where those eighth note beats are so you can feel it. And again, at 80, it's so much more manageable and so much more feasible to practice it at a slow tempo as well. So there's the metronome going. Let me zoom in and let's give this a try. So now it's each one of those lines is where we're lining up. And 1 and 2 triplet and triplet, 3 triplet and triplet, a 4 triplet and triplet, 1, a 2, E and a 4, E and a 1. Sorry, I'm not singing exactly the right notes, but hopefully you get the idea of how you can take complicated subdivisions like that and just change the subdivision of the metronome to make it so much simpler. The one last idea that I want to share about this that makes it so much simpler and so much more clear is that when we have this rhythm, let's take this one, for example, back to the previous line. So when we're looking at a rhythm like this, at first glance, really complicated when we're just thinking in quarter notes, but when we think in eighth notes, it effectively changes the rhythm to something more like this, which is then so much more familiar to us. I bet unless you've done this etude, you probably don't come across eighth notes tied to 32nd notes all that often. But I bet you do come across rhythms like quarter notes tied to 16th notes, and that's a much more familiar rhythm of something like 1, 2, E and a 3, 4, E and a 1. That kind of grouping is something that you probably have encountered before. So again, by changing the subdivision of the metronome, it actually shifts how the rhythm connects to the beat, in that it makes it much more familiar by eliminating some of those complicated bar lines and makes those complicated subdivisions easier. So the main takeaways from this that I hope will be helpful for you are that whenever the metronome is going slower than 60 beats per minute, it's going to be hard to predict. So you can double the subdivision, and instead of feeling a quarter note pulse, feel an eighth note pulse. Or if you're in 6/8, instead of a dotted quarter note pulse, feel an eighth note pulse. And that will give you more anchors to aim for and lean into. And the second big takeaway is whenever you're coming across really fast subdivisions like 16th note triplets, 32nd notes, faster subdivisions like that, when you shift the pulse from quarter notes to eighth notes, it kind of erases one of the bar lines and can make it a much more manageable and approachable and familiar rhythm. So I hope that this has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about this in the comments. Definitely give this a try next time you're playing a piece that's slower than 60 beats per minute and or has subdivisions that are 16th note triplets or faster. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the Quick Start Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.